This case takes place in Liverpool, England, on the 13th of November 1999. Michael Moss was a 15-year-old who lived in Liverpool. He was born in 1983, and it's reported that growing up, Michael wasn't a very academic person. He was, however, very mechanically minded. His mother would later reminisce about the times early in his life where he would dismantle a bicycle completely and then put it back together again just for the fun of it. As he got older, Michael developed a keen interest for motorbikes and became very passionate. Michael was also incredibly close with his father, and the two had a very strong relationship. However, his father tragically suffered a brain hemorrhage, and Michael was only 11 when this happened. His father was rushed to hospital and managed to make some improvements, although the damage to his brain changed him a great deal. Before the brain hemorrhage, he was described as a good man, but after, he became more aggressive. A brain injury can actually greatly change a person's behaviour, and when Michael and his mother visited his father in hospital, he would often lose his cool. He would swear and even spit at Michael and his mother. Seeing this drastic change and seeing his father deteriorate deeply affected young Michael. His grief would only grow when his father sadly passed away following the brain hemorrhage. He was never able to leave the hospital. After seeing his father's passing, Michael's behaviour began to change. His father's death took a great toll on his mental health. At school, he became too much for the faculty to handle, and he was subsequently expelled. After being expelled, Michael was placed into a pupil referral unit. This educational unit was called Pinefields and was set up for children with learning and behavioural needs. However, Michael's behaviour was still a big issue. Michael's mother Liz was still grieving from the loss of her husband and was now struggling to deal with Michael's behaviour. As a result of this, social workers suggested to Liz that Michael should move into a children's home. This was done so Liz could have a break. And so that's what happened. In 1999, Michael moved into the children's home. At this time, he was aged 15. This unit was set up in a way where Michael would be free to leave at any time. This included going to visit his mother or even going out at the dead of night. Michael had settled in well at the pupil referral unit, but also attending this unit were 15-year-olds Alan Bentley and Mark McKeefrey. Both Alan and Mark were friends and had been expelled from their previous school. The two were the school bullies and had badly beaten up another pupil, causing him serious injury, and because of this, they too were sent to the unit. Despite being the school bullies, the two had never committed any serious crimes outside of school, and neither had a criminal record. However, Mark and Alan continued to bully pupils at this referral unit too. Michael decided to keep his distance, but he still remained friendly with them. Another pupil then joined this unit, 16-year-old Graham Neary. Graham quickly became friends with Alan and Mark. Alan also had a girlfriend, but in October of 1999 she ended their relationship to be with Michael. This greatly angered Alan. He would often tell his friends that he wanted to stomp all over Michael's head and kill him. Alan, however, did not act right away. Instead, he thought of ways to get back at Michael. On the 12th of November 1999, Alan had his friends over at his house to celebrate his birthday. These friends included Mark McKeefrey, Graham Neary, and another friend named Neil Breslin. The four watched the movie Reservoir Dogs, shared a bottle of vodka and some cider, and all of them became somewhat intoxicated. Whilst they were all drinking, Alan brought up the situation with his ex and Michael, and began talking like he usually would, stating that he wanted nothing more than to beat Michael up for taking his girlfriend away from him. The more alcohol that was consumed, the more Alan wanted to take action. He then devised a plan. At around 1 AM that night, which was now the 13th of November, Mark made a call to Michael, who was in his room at the children's home. Mark knew of Michael's passion for motorbikes and used this fact to lure him. He told Michael to come and meet him to check out a new motorbike. Michael agreed and told the workers at the children's home that he was going out. The workers told Michael that it was late and that they didn't think it was a good idea to be leaving at this time. But Michael was in no obligation to stay. He could indeed come and go as he pleased. And so Michael set off to meet Mark at 1:20 a.m. The two had planned to meet in an alleyway on the outskirts of Liverpool, but waiting for Michael was Alan, Mark and Neil Breslin. The four walked to the park that was nearby, and once at the park, Alan began the attack. He walked right up to Michael and headbutted him, resulting in Michael falling to the ground. He then proceeded to punch, kick and jump on Michael's head with both of his feet. At this point, Neil Breslin walked away, but Mark and Alan stripped Michael naked and threw his clothing into a puddle. Now naked, Alan began to repeatedly kick Michael in his privates and slashed his legs with broken glass. It's assumed that this was revenge for sleeping with his ex-girlfriend, and this attack lasted for some time. After this savage beating, Alan, Mark and Neil returned to the house. During this first attack, Graham Neary stayed at Alan's home. The three returned back and spoke to Graham about the beating they had inflicted upon Michael and how they had left him naked. Shortly after returning home, they decided that they were not yet done with Michael. They decided to go back. This time, Neil didn't go, but Mark, Alan and Graham did. The three walked towards where Michael was left, and he was still there, laying on the ground. Michael was left in a horrific condition and urgently needed medical attention, but instead of helping, the three began another vicious attack. Mark shouted at Michael, demanding that he stood up at once, otherwise he would smash his face in. Michael tried his best to muster up the strength to get back up on his feet, but the beating he had taken was too much, and he fell back down to the ground. The three then began attacking, kicking Michael in the head, face and genitals. They also picked up a broken bottle and began slashing and stabbing Michael. Then the three pretended that Michael's head was a football. They kept Michael's head still and took turns kicking him as hard as they could in the face and joked how they were taking penalties with his head. Alan shouted that he was a famous footballer named Michael Owen as he took a run up to Michael and kicked him in the face. The three would also play noughts and crosses on Michael's back by carving into his skin with broken glass. It seemed that the three took great joy in torturing Michael. Alan then picked up a piece of the broken glass and began hacking into the skin behind Michael's ear in an attempt to recreate the scene from the movie they had just watched, Reservoir Dogs. Michael's ear was not removed, but Alan had made a serious attempt to do so. The totality of the two attacks lasted for nearly 2 hours. The attackers would later say that for the last 10 minutes of the attack, Michael didn't move or make a sound. After they were done, the three left the scene. At 3:31 a.m, Mark McKeefrey made an anonymous phone call to the emergency services and told them that he had found a dead body and told them the location. The emergency services arrived on the scene, although they claimed that they couldn't find any body at the location they were given, and so the emergency services left the scene. At 7:30 a.m. on the 13th of November, a person walking their dog came across the body of Michael. They made a call to the emergency services, who arrived quickly at the scene. Investigators tried to identify Michael and inquired at the care home where Michael was living, as it wasn't too far from where his body was found. Michael was logged as leaving the home but not returning. He also matched the description of the body the police had found. The police acquired a photograph of Michael and compared the image with Michael's body, hoping to make a positive identification. But Michael's injuries were so severe that they weren't even able to identify him. Michael's face had been so disfigured that they even thought the body was not that of Michael. However, a member of the children's home staff went to the scene and was able to identify the body as Michael. Meanwhile, Michael's mother Liz was at home listening to the radio when she heard the news that the body of a male had been found in a park, and then she noticed police cars pull up outside her home. Liz knew instantly why the police were there. They told her the devastating news that Michael had been killed in a horrific attack. Shortly after the discovery of Michael's body, Graham, accompanied with his mother, came into the police station to confess. Graham claimed to have felt a great deal of remorse for what had happened to Michael. He told the police what had happened and named Alan Bentley, Neil Breslin, and Mark McKeefrey. Graham said that he did take part in the attack, but claimed that he only participated because he was scared that if he didn't, Alan and Mark would attack him too. He spoke to the police about how he kicked Michael in the face, not because he wanted to, but because he was filled with fear. Both Mark and Alan were arrested. It's reported that Graham did actually show signs of genuine remorse. He spoke to the police and answered every question they asked. Both Mark and Alan, however, denied even taking part in the murder. And tragically, because they refused to confess, this meant that DNA evidence had to be uncovered to build up a strong enough case against the two to make sure they were convicted. This meant that Michael's body was sent away for 5 post-mortems, something that deeply affected his mother Liz. Whilst the 4 were in custody, the police searched their homes. Inside Alan's home, they found a comic strip. The comic strip had been drawn by Alan, and it featured himself and Michael and illustrated the murder in great detail. Michael's post-mortems showed that his injuries were just beyond horrific. Both of his cheekbones had been fractured, with complete separation of the nose from the facial skeleton, and fractures extending to both eye sockets. Michael had 10 broken ribs and a broken neck. There were 10 separate areas of bruising to the face and head, and 50 to the body. Michael's body had 48 separate cuts from the glass and a deep gash to the back of his ear. Individually, the slashes and cuts were not deep enough to kill Michael, but the sheer amount of them caused significant blood loss. It was determined that Michael had passed away during the second attack from a broken neck. The attackers had continued to stomp and slash Michael's body even after he died. At the crime scene, the police had found the broken bottle and glass that was used on Michael. On this glass, they found fingerprints that matched with Alan, Mark, and Graham. Because the boys had stomped on Michael, they left trainer imprints on his body. These imprints were cross-referenced with their trainers, which brought up a positive result. Along with other pieces of forensic evidence, the police had enough to charge Alan, Mark, and Graham with murder, and the trial would begin in July of 2000. Before the trial, Neil accepted a guilty plea of violent disorder in regards to the first attack which he was present at, and he was not charged with murder due to him not being present in the second attack. The killers tried to make the preposterous claim that Michael had asked them to beat him up so he could claim for criminal injuries compensation and that they could all split the money. This claim was dismissed as nonsense. And the evidence found against the 3 was overwhelming. Mark, Alan, and Graham were all found guilty of murder. It said that during the trial, Graham showed signs of remorse. Mark and Alan, however, did not. Both Mark and Alan were sentenced to a minimum term of 10 years in prison, whilst Graham was sentenced to 9 years. All 3 have since been released. I'm unaware if any of them have been arrested for other crimes. I did, however, find that Neil Breslin has been convicted for other crimes. In one of these instances, Neil, along with an accomplice, tried to rob a family at knife point in their home during the night. The home belonged to an 80-year-old woman named Winfred and her 82-year-old husband. On this night, their son was also staying with them and was sleeping on the couch. Neil and his accomplice broke in and held a knife to their son and told him to remove his jewellery. although Winfred was having none of it, and she went to the kitchen and retrieved a 15-inch carving knife. It is genuinely reported that Winfred said to Neil, who was holding a 10-inch blade, "You call that a knife?" and pointed the knife at his stomach. Neil, along with his accomplice, fled from the scene. Winfred would later say, "I managed to jam the second man's foot in the door, and I threatened to put the knife through his foot, but he struggled and got away." Neil was sentenced for this crime in 2006, and following his release, he was convicted again for smashing his girlfriend's window. The case of Michael Moss has been dubbed the Reservoir Dogs murder due to the influences the film played in the attack. It's important to say, however, that although the movie inspired some of the graphic things done to Michael, there is no link between violent movies and crime. Michael's mother Liz has 2 other children, and she is a grandmother. She has stated that she loves being a grandmother, but also longs for the day that she can once again be with her son. I do like to receive comments on my videos. Sometimes. I'm never one to ask people to comment, however, this case is rather peculiar, and I would very much like to know people's opinions on this case. I will be keeping my eyes on the comment section of this video in particular, so I would encourage you to comment and share what you think. Also, there are a few names mentioned in this video, and it's a rather complicated one, but I've done my best to keep it nice and simple. This case takes place in Live Oak Springs, California, on the 26th of June, 1988. Irene May was a 23-year-old mother of 3 and was married to a man named Bobby May. Irene was known to abuse illegal substances, and on the 10th of June 1988, the two lost custody of their children. Shortly after, Bobby was arrested, and then on the 25th of June, Irene was evicted from her apartment. To say the least, things weren't going too well for Irene. However, according to the CPS worker assigned to her children, she was attempting to make positive steps to getting her children back, but during this time, she was failing. As a result of being evicted, Irene needed to find a place to stay. A friend of hers, Cheryl Ann Baker, helped her move some of her possessions into storage for the time being. Another friend, only known as George, came along and helped Irene and Cheryl move her belongings into storage. While they were moving Irene's belongings, a 39-year-old woman named Kerry Lynn Dalton came by the apartment. At some point in the past, Irene, Cheryl, and Kerry had all lived together. However, Kerry had been arrested and had just recently been released. Kerry spoke with Cheryl. She was angry and shouted that the majority of the furniture in Irene's apartment actually belonged to her, and she wanted it back. She also told Cheryl that she was looking for some stolen jewelry, and that she believed that Irene had stolen it. Cheryl assured Kerry that she would keep an eye out for any jewelry, and let her know if she found some. Shortly after, Kerry left. After moving everything into storage, Cheryl made a call to Kerry, and informed her that she had looked for her missing jewelry, but claimed that she never found anything. At around 5 p.m. that night, Irene, Cheryl, and George went to go and pick up some meth. The pickup point was at a convenience store. While the three were there, Kerry pulled up in her truck with her boyfriend Mark Tompkins. Kerry and Mark asked Cheryl to help locate a stolen car that belonged to one of their friends, so they could steal it back. Irene and George decided to accompany Cheryl with Mark and Kerry. Despite agreeing to go along, Irene did tell George and Cheryl that she was afraid that Kerry might do something to her. The five then set off to try and locate this stolen car. Kerry and Mark were in their truck, and Irene, Cheryl, and George followed behind in theirs. As the group were driving around, they came across a woman named Joanne Feder at approximately 11:30 p.m. Joanne had pulled over to the side of the road because her truck had broken down. She was accompanied by her 3- and 4-year-old children. The group offered Joanne and her children a lift back to their trailer, to which Joanne accepted. They all arrived back at her trailer and began to shoot up. During the early hours of the morning, Kerry and Cheryl became paranoid and snuck away to go and search George's truck. Irene was the only person who knew George. The rest of them were worried that he may be a police informant. However, nothing to suggest that he was one was found. Back inside the trailer, Kerry got a hold of Irene's purse. She turned it upside down and emptied the contents onto the floor. Some of the missing jewelry that Kerry was looking for allegedly fell from the purse. Kerry was outraged. To make up for stealing, she made commands for Irene to follow. She demanded that she clean the entirety of the trailer, wash the dishes, and perform various tasks and chores. According to the others who were present, Irene appeared to be extremely scared of Kerry. Later on in the early hours of the morning, Joanne overheard Kerry and Cheryl shouting at Irene. They discovered that they had all been using the same needle and Irene had hepatitis. Kerry also began to accuse Irene of being a police informant. When the morning rolled around, Kerry demanded that Irene make everyone breakfast and dress Joanne's children. After everyone was done eating, Joanne helped Irene to wash the dishes. Irene told her that she had a knife and was thinking of using it on Kerry, as at this point she claimed that she feared for her life. Joanne directed Irene how to get out of the trailer park and to the freeway, and told her to get out whenever she could. Irene then asked Joanne to pass on a message to her CPS worker assigned to her children, that she would be unable to attend a scheduled meeting with her on the 27th, which was the following day. After this conversation, at approximately 11:30 AM, Mark and Cheryl left the trailer to drive Joanne and her 2 children to visit her partner. Joanne's partner was incarcerated at the La Cima Conservation Camp. The journey to this correctional facility was approximately 45 minutes away by car. And now, Irene was behind with Kerry and George. Cheryl and Mark dropped Joanne and her children off, and they went to go and pick up some more meth. Joanne told the 2 that she and her children would find their way back to the trailer, and that they did not need to come and pick her up again. A few hours after leaving the trailer, Mark received a call from Kerry. She told him to come back to Joanne's trailer immediately. So Mark and Cheryl dropped what they were doing and made their way back. As they were driving, Mark turned to Cheryl and told her that when they got back to the trailer, she needs to just go with the flow. The 2 arrived back at the trailer at approximately 3:30 PM and walked inside. Cheryl walked into the kitchen to find Irene tied to a chair covered in a bedsheet. Kerry said that something had happened whilst they were gone, and that Irene had tried to run away, but Kerry never went into detail about exactly what happened. Mark and George went outside whilst Kerry led Cheryl to the bathroom, where she had lined up a number of hypodermic needles. Kerry showed her these needles and told her they were filled with battery acid. She then said, "We are going to shoot up Irene with battery acid. It would be real quick and easy. It will kill her instantly." Kerry then told Cheryl that she had to be part of the murder, because if she were to help kill Irene, then she would be guilty too and would not tell the police. Kerry went on to tell Cheryl that Mark wanted to kill her too, so she wouldn't be able to tell the police. The only way to stop that happening was if she was to help kill Irene. That way, she would keep quiet. The 2 then walked back into the kitchen and Kerry gave Irene a sedative to calm her down. She then gave Cheryl a syringe filled with acid and told her to inject it into her veins. Irene then said, "I don't want to die. Please don't kill me, I'm sorry." Cheryl tried to find a vein but was unable to, so Kerry snatched it from her and plunged the needle into Irene's leg. The acid had not entered Irene's vein and thus did not have the desired effect of killing her instantly. Kerry went inside to fetch Mark and George. Mark came inside and picked up a breaker bar and proceeded to strike Irene in the head and body multiple times. Kerry then opened the cupboards and pulled out a heavy cast iron pan. The group used this heavy pan to shatter Irene's kneecaps. Not yet satisfied, the group grabbed an exposed wire, hooked it up to a power point, and began to electrocute Irene. Irene had been injected with acid, electrocuted, and severely beaten, but she was still alive. Mark tortured her further with a screwdriver before getting a knife and stabbing her twice. It was after being stabbed that Irene died. The group then got to work cleaning up some of the blood on the floor, and Mark and George rolled Irene's body up in a carpet and placed her into George's truck. Mark and George then took Irene's body to a nearby Native American reservation and dismembered her body into multiple pieces. They buried each piece in different parts of the reservation, as it would be difficult for the police to search for numerous body parts on a Native American reservation. Whilst the two men were gone, Kerry and Cheryl both began to clean up and collect the items that had been used to torture and murder Irene. According to Joanne, she and her children returned to the trailer at approximately 5:30 p.m. and claimed her trailer was in a state of what she described as disarray. She claimed that a recliner chair, bedding, and clothes were missing, and the contents of her bin had been dumped on the floor. She also found Cheryl cleaning the floor, which she found to be strange. Joanne asked Kerry what had happened whilst she was gone. Kerry claimed that she had gotten into a fight with Irene and that Irene had now left. She also went on to say that she had accidentally cut herself and gotten blood on some of the sheets, but told Joanne that she would take the sheets away with her and clean them for her. Joanne began to examine her trailer. She later claimed that she found a pillow that was covered in blood in her trash can outside. George and Mark returned to the trailer at around 8 p.m, and according to Joanne, the two men were covered in dust and dirt. At around 8:30 p.m, Kerry, Mark, Cheryl and George left the trailer in one of the vehicles. As soon as they left, Joanne made a call to the police to report a burglary. Whilst waiting for the police to arrive, Joanne would later claim that she found blood splatters all around her trailer, a screwdriver with what appeared to be blood, hair and scalp material on the sharp end, a plug-in heater that also had spatters of blood, and a bar of soap that was covered in what looked like teeth marks. Deputy David Wilson arrived at Joanne's home at 9:02 p.m. According to his testimony, he straight away noticed that Joanne was under the influence of meth. She was acting extremely paranoid and was not speaking coherently. The deputy asked Joanne what had been taken from her trailer. She replied that a yellow trash can was missing. She also told the deputy that she had found a bloody pillow, but that this pillow was in a box underneath the trailer. The deputy took his flashlight and looked under the trailer from several points, attempting to locate this box. He could not, however, find anything matching this description. He also inspected the entirety of the trailer, and everything seemed to be in order, apart from some dirty clothes that were on the floor. The deputy would later testify that there was no blood anywhere in the trailer, and no sign that a murder had taken place. He also stated that Joanne had not pointed out any blood spatters or mentioned that she had found a screwdriver covered in blood. Deputy David Wilson then left the scene. After leaving Joanne's trailer, Cheryl, Kerry, Mark and George disposed of the items they had used to kill Irene in a bin at a petrol station. These items included the iron pan, the breaker bar, syringes and a screwdriver. The four then checked into a hotel and discussed what had happened. Mark suggested that they should go back to Joanne's trailer and blow it up to make sure they destroy all of the evidence. However, according to Cheryl, it was ultimately decided that this was a bad idea, as Joanne also had children who were living there with her. Following the disappearance of Irene, rumors began to surface. Cheryl claims that she was fearful that Kerry and Mark would one day kill her to ensure that she could never speak of what happened. Cheryl also claimed that Kerry had discussed the situation with her, and even suggested that they should both kill Mark, so if the murder of Irene was ever discovered, they could just blame it on him and he wouldn't be able to defend himself. Shortly after the disappearance, the CPS worker assigned to Irene's children reported Irene missing, as she was unable to get a hold of her. However, this is when things start to become extremely strange. Bobby May, Irene's husband, had not seen Irene since the 17th of June, 1988, but this was because that's when Bobby was arrested. Bobby also claimed that when he was released sometime in July of 1988, he met up with Irene, and that after this meeting, he never saw her again. Irene was allegedly killed on the 26th of June. So, was Irene really murdered that night? Well, some think she was. Others think that the story I have told is a total fabrication, created by the police to make themselves seem more competent, as at around this time, the police had a bad track record of solving serious crimes. They had 22 unsolved murders of informants and desperately needed results. What I have told you so far has been from the point of view of Cheryl and Joanne, and was pieced together by their testimonies. And of course the perspective of the officer who inspected the trailer that night and claimed to find no signs of anything out of place, only mentioning that Joanne seemed to be in an unstable state. However, Irene really did vanish, and Bobby made efforts to try and locate his wife. Many people who knew him stated that he went through great lengths to try and find her. The family of Irene also searched for her, but to no avail. At some point in the search for Irene, Mark went and spoke with Bobby. During this conversation, Mark suggested to him that he should give up the search for his wife. In August of 1988, 2 months after the disappearance, Joanne's social worker came to visit her in the trailer. The social worker could tell that something was seriously wrong with Joanne. She appeared to be nervous and frightened of something. When asked what was the matter, Joanne got up and told the social worker to follow her. She led her around the trailer, showing her small spots of what appeared to be blood, and told her that she believed that something terrible happened in her trailer while she was gone. Joanne asked this social worker if she would take some items to the police on her behalf. These items included a knife that didn't belong to her and a portable heater that she claimed to be covered in blood. The social worker did as she was requested and brought them to the police and explained the situation to them. On the 15th of September and 16th of November 1988, forensic teams searched the trailer for any presence of blood. However, nothing was found. The knife and heater were also tested. These two tested negative for any traces of blood. The bloody pillow and screwdriver that Joanne had mentioned were never found. Towards the end of 1988, a friend of Cheryl and Kerry's was asked if she would be an informant in the case of Irene. This friend agreed and engaged in a recorded phone call with Cheryl. Cheryl, of course, had no idea that she was being recorded. In this call, it seems that she gave some details that could have incriminated her. What these details were, I cannot find. However, it does seem that further evidence was needed. In July of 1991, 2 unsuccessful searches for Irene's body were carried out. Dozens of investigators and dogs trained to locate human bodies searched for Irene's body. One search was conducted on a Native American reservation and the other near Joanne's trailer, which at this point she no longer lived in. And on the 12th of August 1991, 2 DNA specialists went to the trailer in which Joanne used to live in. The DNA specialists found small spots of blood in the living room and on the master bedroom walls, floors, and ceiling. These spots tested positive for blood. Later on in the same month, further inspections were carried out in the trailer. However, due to an insufficient quantity of blood, the samples were inconclusive of any DNA. On the 31st of October, Joanne was asked to pick out the people who were in her trailer on the night that Irene was there. She was able to successfully identify Kerry, Mark, and Cheryl by looking at their photographs. An unknown person also came forward and told the police that they had been told that Kerry, Mark, Cheryl, and a man by the name of George had killed Irene in a brutal way. From what I can tell, from 1988 to 1992, Kerry, Mark, and Cheryl were brought in and questioned as to what happened to Irene. But it was in 1992 that what happened came to the fore. It was in this year that Kerry, Mark, and Cheryl were arrested. It's unclear if they were already arrested due to other crimes or if it was due to the disappearance of Irene. Cheryl was questioned, and it's reported that she learned that she had been apparently caught on tape describing the murder to a friend. Cheryl then gave the first of a number of confessions. At first, she claimed that she didn't know who was under the bedsheet. However, she would change her story to what I described before. Cheryl confessed that she took part in the brutal torture and execution of Irene, and explained in detail what happened that night. In her confession, she also implicated Mark, Kerry, and George. George could not be found, and they weren't even sure if that was his real name. Mark came clean and spoke to the police about his involvement too, but refused to testify in court. Kerry proclaimed her innocence, and stated that Cheryl and Mark's statements to the police were totally fabricated and untrue. All three were charged with murder. Despite Kerry being adamant that she never killed Irene, a number of people came forward with claims that Kerry and Mark had spoken of the murder to them. A woman named Laurie Carlisle came forward. Both she and Kerry shared a cell after Kerry had been charged with murder. Laurie told the police that Kerry had told her that she, Cheryl Baker, Mark Tompkins, and another man were involved in the murder of Irene May, and that this murder had taken place in the Live Oaks area. Kerry even went on to say that Irene had been beaten, injected with acid, electrocuted, and was dismembered and dumped at a Native American reservation. And then, a friend of Kerry's, Patricia Collins, testified that the two were in jail together shortly after the murder would have happened. Patricia had heard rumors about the murder of Irene and decided to ask Kerry, "Why did you kill her?" Patricia claims that Kerry replied by saying, "Because she was a rat who deserved to die," but did not go into details about the gruesome murder. However, she did say that she didn't think there would ever be a case because there wasn't a body. But just in case there was, she wanted to leave town to avoid being caught if the police did investigate the case. What is strange though is that Patricia said that Kerry would flop back and forth all the time, and gave inconsistent explanations for Irene's disappearance. Kerry once claimed that Irene was still alive and had left town with her new boyfriend. And then a woman named Judy Breakwood also came forward and claimed that she was with Kerry in June of 1988, along with some other people that were friends with Kerry. These friends spoke to Judy about a horrific murder that Kerry had committed, and mentioned that she had shot up a woman with battery acid and burned her. Kerry overheard the conversation and said, "Yep, we really messed her up." The police offered Kerry a plea deal, to which she rejected. Despite this evidence, she continued to tell the investigators that she was innocent and that she would never confess to something that she didn't do. A man by the name of Donald McNeely also came forward to the police. Donald had shared a cell with Mark for 3 months in 1992. During this time, Mark told Donald about the murder. Mark even bragged that it was a torture murder and that the victim was named Irene May. He even told Donald the location of the murder, stating that it had taken place in a trailer park in Live Oak Springs, and went on to say that he enjoyed inflicting violence upon Irene. He said the original plan was to give her an overdose, but instead they decided to torture her. The torture and murder weapons were also spoke of. Mark said he used a screwdriver, a knife, and an iron pan to smash her kneecaps before stabbing Irene and ending her life. Donald recalled Mark stating that he put Irene's body into a truck, drove it to a reservation, dismembered the body, and buried it. Although it should be noted that Donald McNeely was described as a manipulator and a desperate man who would do anything to shorten his prison sentence. From the time that the three were arrested and charged, the police could still not find a murder weapon, DNA evidence, or the body of Irene. Despite this, the trials would begin in February of 1995, but Kerry was to be tried separately. Much of what I have mentioned thus far was brought before the court. Joanne testified in court about the state of her apartment, and that she had also found a screwdriver with blood, hair, and scalp. However, Deputy David Wilson had examined her trailer that night. He testified that he saw no blood or anything to suggest that a murder had taken place. The deputy also testified that Joanne appeared to be mentally ill and not thinking correctly. This was backed up by the multiple forensic searches from that same year that revealed no DNA evidence. Because Irene's body had not been discovered, the prosecution team presented the testimonies from the various people I mentioned before, and the admissions from Cheryl and Mark, along with other circumstantial evidence. During the trial, it was shown that a complete records check was conducted, which included Irene's fingerprints. Every single name that Irene used or was known to use was checked. These names included Louise Clare, Irene Louise Clare, Irene May, Melaine May, and Irene Miller. The system checked these names in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. The only thing that was found was that Irene was arrested on the 2nd of June 1988, and that the case had been dismissed. Nothing else that could be attributed to Irene was ever found, and did not locate any person that went by these names, indicating that Irene was no longer alive. If she had run away, it's likely her prints would have come up again at some point, especially if she was struggling to stay clean. The prosecution team also brought in the CPS worker assigned to Irene May's children. The CPS worker was named Nina Tucker. Nina testified that Irene was working to get her children back. Before she vanished, Irene admitted to Nina that she was struggling to stay clean and was neglecting her children. However, she said she wanted to get her children back. She was tired of being on the street and wanted to make changes in her life. Nina and Irene had arranged an appointment for the 27th of June at 9 AM. This meeting was to come up with a plan to work towards getting her children back. But of course, the 27th of June was the day after the murder. Nina recalled that Irene seemed to be positive, but she didn't see or hear from her again. She testified that Irene and Bobby had been taking parenting classes and made great efforts to be reunited with their children, indicating that she wouldn't just up and leave them. The prosecution team also brought forward a note that was handwritten by Kerry and seems to have been given to a friend. This note read, "Don't worry, they've got nothing and will never have anything. I get out on the 2nd of February, we've got to leave. Try and work on that for me. Try to find me a place to hide out till you get out, and then we'll split. I'm scared they're going to cut me loose, so if they do, I've got to disappear. Help me, I love you lots." A forensic document examiner testified in court that he had compared the note to Kerry's handwriting and believed that it was written by her. Irene also received benefits and food stamps each month. She had received checks on the 1st of June and 15th of June 1988, and they were cashed by her. After the 26th of June, Irene did not reapply for assistance, and the DSS had no further contact with her, which again indicated that she could have been killed. The prosecution team put forward the case that Kerry wanted to kill Irene for a number of reasons. Because of the stolen furniture and jewelry, because they had shared needles with Irene, who was hepatitis positive, and because she believed Irene to be a police informant, and that in a drug-fueled rage, the group horrifically tortured and killed her. As I said earlier, Irene's husband Bobby May was adamant that he had seen her in July, which was of course the month after she was killed. Bobby even testified in court that he did see her. It's this fact that to me makes this case incredibly fascinating. The defense team pushed back that there was no body, no DNA evidence, no murder weapon, and no definitive crime scene. They also stated that the testimonies were collected from criminals and addicts, and that because of this they were not reliable witnesses. Meth is also known to cause hallucinations and delusions. This was also brought forward in the case. Kerry's defense team also suggested that the police had pinned the murder on Kerry, Cheryl, and Mark, and offered Mark and Cheryl a lesser charge if they testified, and pleaded guilty. Cheryl had pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Mark had pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, but Kerry pleaded innocent, and she never made any formal confessions to the investigators. Kerry accused the prosecutor, Jeff Dusek, of willful misconduct. During the trial, Kerry stated, "The thing that makes me the most mad is that he is lying, and he knows he is lying." The judge overseeing the case made a statement which goes as follows. "I think the record is clear that nobody has ever been found in this case. The record is equally clear that there is circumstantial evidence that there was a homicide. There's also conflicting circumstantial evidence that it may not be a homicide. In fact, she may still be alive." All three were found guilty of the murder of Irene May. Cheryl Ann Baker was sentenced to 15 years. Mark Lee Tompkins was sentenced to 25 years. And Kerry Lynn Dalton was sentenced to death. The jury's foreman, John Castleman, said that they based the verdict of death on the type of murder it was. Although there was no physical evidence to support the prosecution's story that there was even a murder, they believe that the corroborating testimonies from the numerous people and the testimonies from Cheryl and Joanne were sufficient enough to convict the three. The man, only known as George, was never found, and to this day Irene's body has not yet been found, and likely never will be, due to the way she was said to have been killed and disposed of. Kerry Lynn Dalton still remains on death row and proclaims her innocence to this day. Her sister, Victoria Ann Thorpe, maintains a blog in support of Kerry. She believes her sister to be innocent and has also written a book trying to prove her innocence, which is called Cages and is self-published. The book is available to buy on Amazon. If you look at the review section, you will find reviews from Irene's family and Joanne. As an insight into Kerry, her prison pen pal statement about herself is on screen right now to read. "I do find this case strange for a number of reasons. Someone being found guilty and sentenced to death without a body, DNA evidence, or a crime scene is rather strange. I'm unsure as to how common this is, but I've never heard of it before. I also found it strange that Bobby May testified that he saw Irene in July. It's also worth mentioning that neighbours that night did hear the sound of arguing, but they never heard the sounds of anyone screaming in pain as if they were being tortured. Although, Joanne did claim that she found a bar of soap in the trailer with what looked like teeth marks, so it's likely they gagged her with the soap at some point. Please let me know what you think about this case. This case has gripped me more than any other, and I'm not entirely sure what to think of it. I'll refrain from giving my opinion and allow you all to make your own judgments, and hopefully get some discussion going in the comment section.
picture can say 1,000 words. In the world of horror, imagery is important. Whether in the theater of the mind or with an actual image, more horror can be conveyed when an image or video is utilized. In the internet's horror community, there's a decent amount of stories that derive their horror from images. Infamous stories like Jeff the Killer, Slender Man, and Smile Dog are all based on an image, while other stories will use an image to enhance their story after the fact. Hello friends, today we'll be going down the iceberg that is internet image horror. For this iceberg, I've included image creepypastas, image-based internet horror stories, disturbing images, and more. I also want to point out that some of the creepypastas are just about a picture, but don't have a picture attached. I did mostly grab creepypastas with images though. Let's start our descent. Starting off this iceberg with probably the most famous or infamous image creepypasta, here we have smiledog.jpg. This creepypasta has been making the rounds in the internet since 2008. It was first said to have appeared on 4chan before spreading to the rest of the internet. The true origin of the creepypasta is still not known. The image itself also has no known source. This is something that makes this creepypasta stand out a lot more. We'll talk about that more after the story though. In the summer of 2007, a student, an amateur writer, was trying to conduct an interview with a woman by the name of Mary E. The narrator was looking for something that had been an urban legend he'd heard about many times as a child. According to the narrator, Mary was one of the few people that had first-hand experience with this legend. When the narrator arrived at the residence, Mary refused to leave her room for the interview. Her husband of 15 years tried to comfort her through the door for half an hour before the narrator decided to cut his losses. He did take notes though while listening to her through the door, but most of what he got revolved around incoherent dreams and ramblings. The narrator then explains that in 2005 was the first time he'd heard of smile.jpg. It was an internet urban legend, and one that he was very interested in. The rumor of the urban legend always pointed to Mary as a survivor of something called smiledog.jpg. Those rumors aside, there wasn't much evidence of its existence at all. Not online, not on forums, and nowhere you could reasonably expect to find that kind of stuff. The urban legend centered on this picture of a husky in a dimly lit room that appeared to have sharp human-like teeth. It is said that all 400 people, Mary included, that saw the photo originally suffered from nightmares and epileptic seizures. Though there were some photos being spread around 4chan at this time, those were determined not to be the original photo. The most prolific legend around Smile Dog is that it was actually spread through a chain letter with the subject line, "Smile, God loves you." This was a common occurrence for the time, and many didn't really know what chain letters even were. Later the narrator would receive an email from Mary with an apology and some words of advice. She apologized for not talking to him, but also said that she was glad she didn't. She explained that ever since she saw Smile Dog, she would see him in her nightmares. Every night when she did, he would ask her to spread the word. Mary was unsure why it wanted the word spread, or if it would help her in any way if she did. The assumption was that if she spread, it would leave her be. She was even sent a floppy disk with a package with no return address, which she assumed held the photo. Of course she was ready to pass the burden on to the narrator, but backed out at the last minute. She leaves the email with one final warning to not ask others for the image, as they probably won't be as considerate as she is. A month after this email, the narrator was contacted by the husband to say that his wife had taken her own life. He had found that email she sent him and continued with the warnings that she had given. The narrator later verified that she had indeed passed, but didn't mention how. After some time had passed, the narrator would receive an email from someone he didn't know. The email read, "Hello, I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you were interested in Smile Dog. I have saw it. It is not bad, as everyone says it is. I have sent it to you here. just spreading the word. The narrator pondered whether to even open the file attached to the email. Was it the real smile.jpg? And what if Mary's warnings were true? Would that mean that he would be tormented every night until he spread the word? Would that even work? Would he even be able to spread the word? Yes, he could, and he attached it to the bottom of the creepypasta. This is the original creepypasta that came with the story of smiledog.jpg. In this story, it's referred to as smile.jpg, but of course the creepy image of the husky is the entity that haunts people. This is probably one of my favorite creepypastas, actually. It was created in 2008 and predates many of the classic era creepypastas, but is by far one of the best. It really shows how good this medium can be for creative horror stories. The story has no author attached, and that anonymous author is what gives it so much intrigue. The image itself also doesn't have a traceable source, which makes it a true mystery. Not only does that add to the story, it also makes it a true urban legend in that case. Many have tried to find the source for the image, but no one has just yet, leaving this as one of the many early internet urban legends. Also, the image isn't alone. It is also said to have an image that can change depending on the viewer. This image is probably one of the most iconic images on the entire internet. This is the original image used for Jeff the Killer, a pretty subpar creepypasta that I won't go into full detail about here, as he's going to be on a different iceberg. I would be remiss for not including it here though, as the image itself has become an internet urban legend. This image even today sends a shiver down my spine. Something about it just digs deep into my subconscious and sets off my fight or flight. I even remember when I first saw this image. That's how much it stuck with me. It was a late night of gaming, and I was just finishing a match of League of Legends with my friends when I decided it was time for bed. It was either midnight or 1 a.m., and I wanted to watch some YouTube before going to sleep. At this time, I was just starting to find out about the world of creepypastas, and up to this point, I'd only been reading the gaming-themed ones. I started YouTube on my Xbox 360 and clicked on the first Mr. Creepypasta video that I saw. The next thing I know, this image is on my screen, and I'm listening to the original Jeff the Killer creepypasta. I actually really liked the creepypasta, but I had to stop the video as the image actually scared me. I could blame being tired or that it was just perfect setting for it to creep me out, but I think the image just does that by itself. Now for the origin of the image, well, that's still something people aren't sure about. The origin of the image has had many leads over the years that have died along the way. The biggest is probably the story of a girl that asked if she was pretty on a 4chan board. The girl's name was Katie Robinson, and supposedly she was harassed and bullied by the users. They would eventually edit the photo and keep posting it until it became the famous Jeff the Killer image. This cyberbullying eventually led to her taking her own life. This story was debunked though, and the actual girl behind the photo is still alive and has nothing to do with this rumor. This has led to many rabbit holes of people trying to find out the origin of this photo. Now I could make an entire video out of this subject, but I wouldn't be able to say more than blame it on Jorge already has. If there's a big investigation or an update, then maybe I'll consider it, but until then I'm going to leave this story here. The image is very funny in a way, but also still gives me a quick shiver. Creepypasta withstanding, this image will probably always be part of the internet's urban legends. On May 12th of 2019, this image was posted to 4chan's paranormal board. The accompanying text read, "If you're not careful, and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the back rooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." This was the creation of one of the most interesting internet urban legends, the backrooms. The backrooms are some pocket dimension that you can accidentally find yourself in, filled with empty office spaces, fluorescent lights buzzing above, and moist carpet. The backrooms have taken on a life of their own here on the internet. The mythos of the backrooms is ever growing. Even now, there are creators adding to the lore of this space. There are ARGs, creepypastas, games, short films, and just about every form of medium that covers the backrooms. Going too heavily into the mythos and lore of the backrooms wouldn't really fit with this video. Instead, I just want to take a look at this image attached to the story. This is the backrooms, as mentioned above. The look fits the text perfectly and really gives off a liminal space horror. It feels unnatural, and like you're not supposed to be there. Much like the Jeff the Killer image, the true origin of the backrooms image is unknown. There's a lost media wiki page and a group trying to find its origins. There have been many false leads with many people taking pictures of empty office building spaces that look similar, but the real space hasn't been found just yet. The oldest version of the image was tracked down to 2012, but aside from that, not much is really known. This is honestly one of the greatest parts of the backrooms, the mystery of the image. Finding it would be a huge victory for internet lost media enthusiasts, but the mystery of it all is far better in the long run. Here's our first short creepypasta that I'll be reading in full. On March 12, 2007, on the B board of 4chan, an anonymous user posted a GIF image. At first glance, strangely the GIF image wasn't animated. It was titled I'mHappy.gif and showed what appeared to be a drawing of a smiley face, only with realistic looking eyes and a mouth. People who clicked on it saw the smiley face's smile slowly turn to a frown, and the eyes taking on an angrier appearance. The smiley face would then scream loudly, loud enough to burst eardrums, and gruesome images would flash by quickly. After about 5 minutes, it would show the text, "Have a nice day," and then the user's computer would automatically close out of the browser and would stop working, as if a virus had corrupted the hard drive. People whose computers were infected would shortly be found in their homes, skinned and mutilated, with a smiley face painted in blood on the floor next to their corpses. The founder of 4chan, Moot, would always claim that the pictures never existed, and that the murders were unrelated. However, somewhere in the archives, the picture still exists. Most people who attempt to post it are usually swiftly banned by Moot. This one is short, but really good in my opinion. It takes a lot of the usual creepypasta tropes, but doesn't use them super poorly. The images popping up of grotesque imagery is the shock value that I expect from most creepypastas, but the whole thing is so short that it doesn't really hamper the story too much. The ending with the creator of 4chan saying it never existed is probably true. It never did any of these things, but it's still a fun story. Also, I have to mention the part where everyone who saw this image just got straight up murdered, because that is a very extreme claim to make. All things considered, not a bad short pasta. The girl in the photograph is a certified classic in the world of creepypastas. Most people have probably already heard of this one, as it's likely they ran into it in many different places on the internet. It was such a short story that it was perfect for retelling or posting anywhere. I actually first found this story while reading through an app that used to send me short horror stories to read daily. This is one of the first stories I read. The actual story is pretty short, so let me read it in full. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class and doing math. It was 6 more minutes until after school. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned to look at the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran over to the spot where he saw it. He ran fast so that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had to be a picture of the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful and he wanted to meet her, so he ran all over the school and asked everyone if they knew her or had ever seen her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he was home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately she also said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placing the picture on his bedside table and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap at his window. It was like a nail tapping. He got scared. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window, so he got out of bed, walked towards his window, opened it up, and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day, he again asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said sorry, no. When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew her. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again, he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road when suddenly he got hit by a car. He was dead with the picture in his hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. Suddenly he saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. This is a short story that spreads perfectly because of its length. It's one that I often tell my friends who are not aware of what creepypastas are. This one was pretty popular and it still stands today. When you think of creepypasta photos, many of you probably think of the Jeff the Killer image. The image was pretty popular and it's still talked about to this day. One that many seem to gloss over are the original Slender Man photos. Slender Man actually started out as an image creepypasta. There was a contest being held on the Something Awful forums and these Slender photos were submitted by a user named Victor Surge. The images would go on to win the contest and forever cement the Slender Man into the lore of the internet. The photos also had some writings attached to them. This first one said, "We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them, but his persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time." This quote added a little context to the photo, but kept the intrigue of the entity going. The second image had this quote, "One of the few recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken on the day that 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformity cited as film defects by officials. Fire at the library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence." This quote gives the entity its name and also establishes what it does without giving away too much. The Slender Man would go on to get video games, fanworks, a few ARGs, and generally run the internet until becoming too saturated. There's more to the downfall of Slender, but that can go in a video all by itself. If there's interest, maybe I'll cover him someday. Zalgo, or He Who Waits Behind the Wall, is an entity that I've covered completely in a prior video on my channel. The link to that is in the description. I'll give a basic rundown as he is still an image-based creepypasta at heart. Zalgo came from the mind of a user on the Something Awful forums, much like Slender and others. Zalgo's original lore had him only being able to alter images in comics. These were some of those comics. The comics show the tainting of childhood innocence and create this entity that appears to be almost eldritch in nature. Zalgo is said to have the ability to taint anything that he wishes, be it video, images, comics, or even text. Zalgo is the entity that is prophesied to end the world. "He is Zalgo and he comes" are phrases that are pretty common in the Zalgo lore. The lore may have started with images, but it changed over time. He became more of the ultimate evil that plagued the internet. Everything he touched turned to nightmare fuel. The Portraits is a very short creepypasta that is very well known in the world of internet horror. The story is only 3 paragraphs, but sets up a very creepy premise and delivers on that horror. Since this one is short, I'll again be reading it in full. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around the inside of the cabin, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by several portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred and malice. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the hunter awoke. He turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. Now that is The Portraits, a pretty eerie story that is short and makes you think. Honestly, one of the best short horror stories in my opinion. The idea of a group of strangers staring at you while you're asleep in an unfamiliar place is a great horror premise. The story also doesn't over-explain itself. It gives you what you need to feel the fear and then it ends. I actually have a fear of looking out a window and seeing something staring back. I'm not sure if there's a name for that kind of fear, but I have it. Slideshow is another short pasta, let me just read it. Fingers trembling with excitement, I opened the package. Just as I had hoped, it was the camera I won on eBay. With mild delight, I realized that I had received a better deal than I had planned, because the previous owner had left the memory card in the slot. Before sending an email to the seller alerting them of the mistake, I decided to see if anything was on it. Setting the camera on slideshow, I watched as the camera displayed a picture of a shipping label. My confusion turned to horror as the next image was of a person brutally murdered. The rest of the card was alternating pictures of mailing addresses, followed by a murder scene. The last image was of the shipping label from the box I had just opened. Straight to the point and creepy. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. There's just some creepypastas that don't leave much room for interpretation, and instead just want to tell you a spooky story. Tower of Silence is a creepypasta that I had to do some background research on. I didn't know what a Dakma was, and I wasn't so familiar with the Zoroastrian religion. With that bit of research out of the way, let's get to the story. A group of Indian officials were following leads on missing person reports from a city near the deep jungle. This led them to a Tower of Silence, or Dakma. The Dakma was a site used to dispose of those who had passed away and was seen as a way of giving back to nature by letting birds and wild dogs eat the remains. This photograph is the only image to come from this particular incident. The weirdness goes deeper though. None of the bodies in this photo were ever identified, and the villagers who had reported missing people stated that these were not those people. Also, the usual birds and dogs were nowhere to be seen. In fact, there was no wildlife aside from flies and maggots. At the center of the tower was a pool of blood that was several feet deep. Even with the blood from every dead body there, it was still more than they'd be capable of producing. The stench that the blood gave off was enough for the officials to never want to return to this particular site. The expedition met with an unexpected end when one of the villagers accidentally kicked a small bone into the pit. The pit then exploded, sending blood and liquid flying out. Those that were covered in the blood were immediately sent to the hospital and quarantined. Those people would later go mad with fever and never recover. Officials later returned to the site with hazmat suits, but were met with an unusual sight. All of the bodies were gone and the blood pit was completely empty. The only evidence of this site's existence was this photograph. Now, this photo is pretty creepy, and if I had not done a little research, this whole site would look alien to me. Of course, with what I know now, I see this as a burial rite, and one that makes sense. The story attached is pretty creepy and is another short one that leaves you asking a lot of questions. The scariest part of this story comes with the fact that this picture looks so creepy. This picture adds a little evidence to the writing. Of course, the story itself is creepy too, with a strange, almost otherworldly anomaly being found deep in the forest of India. The mystery continues to grow and never gives up any answers, and I think that does well for the story. Our next creepypasta is called Janice.jpg. It's a pretty straightforward story about a man that explores the internet a bit too much. We've all glimpsed the weird side of the internet, but the narrator of this story made it a full-time job. Janice.jpg is a story where the narrator is actually named. His name is Mark Spielman, and he works for the police department. His job was to find illegal websites and direct them to the police. This means that he would have to sit through some of the worst the internet had to offer. After being hired for the job, he got immediately to work finding what the internet tries to hide. His first few assignments were pretty straightforward, until he came upon the website sweet15.com. With a name like that, Mark was pretty sure he'd stumble upon a child predator website. Exploring the website at first seemed promising, but it didn't seem to have a point. The first image he clicked on was titled Kathy.jpg. The picture loaded and showed a girl smiling at the camera. The girl looked to be about 15 or 16, but she looked fine and not in any precarious situation. The one thing that Mark did notice odd was that the name of the picture was now Janice.jpg. Mark clicked back to the main page and followed another link with a different girl's name. Once again, he was back on the same picture of Janice. Every picture that he clicked on led him back to that photo. He even brought in help, and all of them saw that photo over and over again. So far, there was nothing explicitly illegal about the website. It seemed like one big joke was being played on him. He couldn't find anything, and as he was leaving work for the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to explore the site more. Mark returned home and couldn't sleep. His mind was racing and he knew what to do. He would have to go to that site again and dig deeper than he had before. He returned to the list of names and scrolled to the bottom. At the very bottom of the list was a file named TrueJanice.jpg. He immediately clicked on the image and saw the same photo from before, but in black and white. Mark covered the picture and found an embedded link. Clicking on it, his computer shut down and gave him the infamous blue screen. A few minutes of tinkering and he was able to get his computer turned back on. The computer loaded up, but every single application had been deleted from his desktop. A pop-up window said that 1,000 photos were being copied over to his main drive. The background screen of his computer was also changed to the same photo of Janice, the black and white one from before. There was a pretty big change though. Janice appeared to be frowning now, and she looked fearful. The 1,000 photos had finished downloading, and now all that was left was for him to examine them. Starting with the first image, Mark noticed immediately that they were pictures of Janice. He started flipping through them rapidly and saw that the images were changing slightly. At first she wore a smile and then it turned to the frown from before. Eventually she was full on screaming. The pictures eventually became a black screen. He clicked through them until a room appeared in the photos. At the center of the room was a bed with a bundle of something on it. Mark couldn't really be sure because it was covered by a blanket. As Mark continued clicking through the pictures, a man entered the room. He walked over to the bed and ripped the blanket from it. On the bed was a girl who had been tied down and her stomach was ripped open. The man then proceeded to operate on her while she was still alive. Mark saw picture 999 and it was a close-up of the girl. It was Janice, and the final image showed her lifeless face staring into the camera. The final picture was a question mark with the phrase, "Who is Janice?" written on it. That's the story of Janice.jpg. I'm actually a big fan of stories that utilize the medium that I think has a ton of opportunity, the internet. Stories about strange websites, mysterious links and files, and obscure forums always intrigue me. This story focuses on a website that hides some very deadly secrets. I'm not sure what the purpose of the website is, and I like that. I prefer not to know why, because it adds a sense of mystery to the story. Something I left out was the ending where the entire story was part of a police report. Mark had gone missing after the incident. It doesn't really follow up with anything after that. It just says that the police dropped the case since they had no leads. The detectives later found a code that was hidden in the Janice picture. Combining it together created a video file. The officers who investigated this lead deleted the video and refused to talk about it. I don't really like this part. Officers probably aren't just going to delete evidence, no matter what they see. Also, the police aren't just going to drop this case. There's a murder involved and one of the employees has gone missing after researching the case. The overall story is fine, but this little end piece could use a revision or two. Anomaly is a creepypasta I've been wanting to talk about for a while. It's one that I find very interesting and definitely one that should be talked about more. It was created by Rembetis and was posted on 4chan before ending up on the creepypasta wiki. The creepypasta starts with the narrator telling us that they're posting something they shouldn't be, and they've chosen 4chan so they can remain anonymous. He goes on to explain that he works for a printing company that mainly prints coffee table books. You know, the kind of books that you can flip through when you're bored, but never read fully. His company finally got an interesting deal worked out. An old man had contacted the company and wanted them to release a series of photos for him, ones that he considered to be very valuable. The name of the book was to be called Anomaly, and that's how he described his collection of photos. The company wasn't sure until they saw a few of the images being pitched, along with a small write-up for each one. They saw the interest and decided to go through with the deal. This would prove to be a tedious process as the old man would only send one photo at a time and wouldn't send the next until he received his previous one back. He was very protective of his collection, as he reminded them on several occasions. The narrator notes that they were about a third of the way through the book when the old man pulled out of the project. He hired a lawyer that voided his contract and threatened to sue them if they tried to publish it anyways. That's where the narrator's post comes in. He was so mad at all the lost work they did that he decided he would post 14 of the photos onto the internet and let the world see them. These are those 14 photos. The first photo shows a group of school kids. This was the last image taken of these students before they perished in a fire that took place in 1908 in Collinwood, Ohio. Not a single kid survived the fire that took the lives of 172 students, 2 teachers, and 1 rescuer. The second photo is of an entity that appears to be a woman with a very large dog. This photo was taken by a man named Charlie Noonan. He was a folklorist and was visiting Oklahoma when he was told this strange tale of this woman. After going out searching for her, he was never seen again. The photos were recovered when a man at a pawn shop got a hold of his camera and sent it to Noonan's wife. These were the last images taken on the camera. The third photo shows members of the Union Army right before the Battle of Antietam. The man on the far right lost the right side of his face as well as his arm. The image has some damage that coincides with what happened. It's not entirely known when the photo was damaged. The fourth image supposedly captures the only proof of the Axeman of New Orleans. It was taken by a French photographer and inventor who was traveling around the US at the time. The image was discovered by his daughter after he had passed away. The fifth image was taken in the Grand Caverns in southwestern Virginia. It appears to show some strange cave-dwelling cryptids. This image was taken by Orrin Jeffries as he was trying to see if there was any way to take photos in total darkness. After leaving his camera in the cave, he swore he saw something and ran away until he was out of the cave. A few days later, he and a friend returned for the camera and found this image on it. In 1938, the sixth photo was taken after a car crash. A mother and her twins were in the crash, but only the mother survived. This photo was taken by a policeman at the scene, and it appears the twins wanted to watch what happened next. The seventh photo shows a group of kids and their donkey. This was the last image of these kids taken before the accident. The 3 kids had fallen asleep in their family barn right before their father drove in with the hay sweep and dismembered the kids exactly where the damage on the photograph was. Photo 8 shows a ghost showing up to watch her murderer be hanged. He was a drifter who came into town and murdered her. He was later hanged by the townsfolk. Photo 9 was of a woman who got lost in an intricate underground tunnel system of an asylum. This asylum was famously known to be the one that inspired H.P. Lovecraft's Arkham Sanatorium and also for inspiring Batman's Arkham Asylum. One of the patients, a woman named Sarah Eustace, wandered into the underground tunnels and was never seen again. A nurse at the asylum would go down into the tunnels when she was off shift and try to find the missing woman, but was never successful. This picture was taken on one of her expeditions. The 10th photo shows a family photo where a deceased relative decided to join. He was the uncle that was known for playing jokes on everyone. This was his last joke. In 1935, a woman by the name of Josephine Yerno went missing while on one of her nightly strolls. Search parties turned up nothing, but 3 years later she would be found squatting in front of one of the neighbors' homes. She appeared to be completely alright and had no idea that she'd been missing. To her, no time had passed. She refused medical attention and even continued her walks. This photo was taken of her on one of her walks. 5 years after her initial disappearance, she would disappear again, but this time for good. No one knows what happened to her, and this photo paints a very eerie feeling to the whole situation. The 12th photo depicts a mill. This mill was infamous for its child labor and actually caused child labor laws to be enacted. A 9-year-old girl would lose her life at the mill. This photo was taken, and a tall white figure can be seen in the corner window, but is not reflected in the lake below. Photo 13 shows a girl named Lily Palmer as she's about to go trick-or-treating with her nanny. This was the same year that she tried to claw out her eyes and she reported seeing things crawling in her eyes. The girl was later hospitalized for her condition after she tried to poke out her eyes with sewing needles. This photo supposedly depicts the first signs of her illness. The final image shows a cropped version of a nuclear bomb test from 1945. The uncropped version seems to show a UFO. This image has only been seen by a select few and is likely the only copy left. That was Anomaly, and I really like the creepypasta. It gives a believable intro and then follows up with images that add to the story. These images could easily be from anywhere, just taken from the internet with their issues, but having the stories included with each one makes it interesting. I like creepypastas that include media like this. I also really enjoy each image having its own unique and creepy backstory. It makes it feel like each image is its own story, which is kind of the point, I guess. This creepypasta is definitely one worth checking out if you haven't already. The last creepypasta on this tier is Satellite Images. It was written by user Squid Ink and posted to the creepypasta wiki in 2013. It follows a person who can't leave their apartment due to a car accident that left them in a wheelchair. Due to this, they spend most of their time traveling the world using Google Earth. This was usually done by picking a random city and then dropping in on a random street. Watching the people go about their lives always made the narrator feel better. While moving around the streets of Tokyo, they saw a woman with red shoes. Her shoes stuck out because they had the same ones. For a moment, they felt like they had connected with a random Google Earth stranger. That moment lapsed as they decided it was time for bed. The next morning, they decided they would visit Paris. Grabbing the Google character icon, they dropped them onto the street view. The city of Paris was one of their favorites to see. That was until they saw the same woman again with the red shoes. This had to be some cosmically insane coincidence. Leaving Paris, they decided to go to Berlin, and once again she was there. She appeared to be getting closer to the camera each time she was seen. Her face was also turning more and more towards the narrator. Another city and she was there again. No matter which city the narrator went to, the lady with red shoes was around. She also continued to get closer with each sighting. The narrator switched to their city and once again the girl was there. This time she was looking directly at them. They thought it had to be a joke Google was playing. They switched to the camera outside of their apartment complex and saw no one. With a relieved sigh, the narrator logged off of Google Maps. They were ready to never use it again when a knock was heard at their door. The narrator had a camera installed to see who their visitors might be. When they flipped at the camera, they saw the woman with red shoes staring directly at them. Her face was still blurred as if on Google Maps. This is kind of a classic story in the world of creepypastas. I've heard this one a multitude of times by many different narrators. I actually enjoyed the story a lot. The story is excellent at setting up its premise of a person who can't travel the world and finds another way. This of course leads to the lady in red shoes tracking them down. The ending is purposefully vague, and I think it does well for the story. I also really like the use of Google Maps as a story element. People using websites that we all know about is an easy way to connect with your audience. The description of the blurry-faced woman staring into the camera at the end was the perfect way to end the story as well. It's foreboding and creepy, so perfect for an internet horror story. The image that's often used for this creepypasta is one from Google Maps. There are a ton of images on Google Maps that are bizarre, creepy, disturbing, and unexplainable. I'll be talking about those images later in the iceberg, so don't worry. We'll discuss this one too. This man is the first entry to start off the second tier of this iceberg. Have you ever seen this man before? Maybe in your dreams? He is said to have been seen around the world, but mainly by residents of major cities. He will appear to them in their dreams and talk to them or give them advice. Every single person who has laid eyes upon this man in their dreams claims to have never seen him in real life. The story goes that at least 2,000 people who were being seen by therapists all reported sightings. Each person's dream involving this man varied in some pretty drastic ways. In some dreams, the man was benevolent and helpful, while in others, he was violent and cruel. A man with this face and depiction has not been identified. This is because this man doesn't exist. Not in a supernatural kind of way, but more as this was all created as a publicity stunt. This man was created by a marketing company to promote something. That something hasn't really been released yet, though it is believed to be in relation to a movie. No movie has been announced or released since. This man also had a website created to go with the viral hoax called thisman.org. The website hosted thousands of fake accounts with this man, and even had images sent in from the public trying to identify the man. The website also had theories that tried to legitimize the whole thing. This is honestly such an interesting marketing plan, but it didn't really sell anything. I guess the face of this man is now stuck in the subconscious of the internet. I even read 2 separate creepypastas that claimed that this man was haunting them. Pass It On is a creepypasta from No Sleep. It was written by fellow YouTuber and horror content creator Penny Tails Up. It follows a young child who is rather imaginative and decided to create a game to play while in class to escape boredom. Before that, they would daydream to no end. The game they created was pretty simple to play. It had no name, as naming it would take the fun out of it. All of the kids would just refer to it as taking notes. The narrator would write something on a piece of paper. It could be anything from a joke to the start of a story, or even just random words. The note would then be passed to another person and then to another. The first rule of the game was not to be caught, by the teacher that is. The second rule is that whoever gets the note next has to add something to it. The third and final rule is to pass it on after you add to it. The game ended when the narrator got the paper back. The kids would all then gather around the narrator at recess and read what had been added. This was usually filled with laughter and fun all around. This made the narrator the most popular kid in class, and that in turn made them not need their imagination as much. No, they had real friends to interact with, and didn't need the imaginary ones anymore. It all started like any other version of the game. The narrator wrote something down and passed it along. The paper moved from person to person until getting to a girl named Lydia. She screamed and dropped the paper. The teacher turned around and she said that she saw a big spider. The game continued until the note came back to the narrator. The class seemed quieter than usual, as they exited for lunch. Lydia ran up to the narrator and stopped them in the hall. She asked that they not show anyone the note at lunch today. This confused the narrator until they decided to look at the note. The page started out how most do with the simple writings of kids, but then about halfway down the page was a drawing. This drawing was incredibly gruesome and showed Lydia ripping herself open. The drawing looked far better than anyone in the class was capable of, but someone had to have drawn it. The narrator agreed not to show it and told everyone that they'd lost the note. The next day in class, something was off. The narrator scanned the room and saw that Lydia's chair was empty. There was an odd silence about the classroom, well, for at least half of it. The half that had seen the drawing, that is. Kids kept asking for the narrator to start the next note. It took a bit of prodding, but they finally decided to do it. The note went around the room until it got back, and this time a new picture was drawn. This one was of another classmate, Brian. Brian didn't show up the next day either. The narrator wanted to end the game. They wrote that they didn't want to play anymore, but when they looked down at the page, it clearly said, "Pass it on," in perfect cursive. The handwriting couldn't have been theirs. It was too neat, too perfect. The note was then passed along, but it never made it back to the narrator. Instead, it was actually seen by the teacher, Mrs. Knott, who took the paper and placed it in her desk drawer. That was it. The game was over. The class had lost, but no one seemed to mind. At the end of it all, 7 kids never returned to school. The kids were never told what happened to their classmates. They were kids after all. They were spared the details, but deep down the narrator knew what had happened to them. The idea had slipped their mind for decades. That was until, while drinking alone at a bar, an old woman walked in and sat down next to them. The woman looked mildly familiar, but they couldn't place her face. It wasn't until the woman spoke that they knew. "Pass it on," she said with a shrill voice. It was Mrs. Knott, and as they realized it, a note was passed to the narrator. It was old, but clearly the one from that day. She had held onto it for all these years. The woman looked ragged beyond her years. A tear rolled down the teacher's face as the narrator left with the paper. That night as they opened the note, they saw something out of the corner of their eye. A low voice asks, "Did you miss me?" Pass It On is a great read, but I'm not really sold on the ending. I like a little ambiguity in my horror stories, and this one tells you a lot. We can surmise that the entity that started to haunt their game used to be an imaginary friend of the narrator's. This murderous entity then started targeting the kids, the new friends of the narrator. Overall, a good story and definitely one with an interesting concept. Teddy isn't really an image creepypasta. The only reason I'm including Teddy here is because this image gave me nightmares for weeks. This is the image attached to the creepypasta. I don't know the origins of this image or what it depicts, but that's not really important. This image is freaky to me, and I've always been pretty freaked out by creepy dolls and toys. The creepypasta starts with the narrator explaining how their sister had a creepy stuffed teddy bear when they were little. The teddy bear had this weird and realistic face that used to terrify them. The toy scared them so much that they refused to be in the same room with it for a while. Since the family had a dog, the stuffed bear had to be placed up so that it wouldn't get chewed on. The best place to put the bear was on a shelf in the hallway. Every night when the narrator would go up to their bedroom for bedtime, they would see the teddy bear's face around the corner of the hallway. It always seemed to be staring at them. Years later, the sister had outgrown the thing and it was placed in the toy cabinet. The toy cabinet just so happened to be in the narrator's room. Every night they would wake up and see the bear just staring in their direction. That wasn't until one night when the narrator woke up and saw the bear on the floor at the end of the room. Thinking it just fell, they went back to sleep. They awoke again, and it seemed like the bear was closer. After fighting a yawn, they opened their eyes to see that the bear was at the foot of their bed. The narrator pulled the covers over their head and looked out again. The bear was gone. It was all some sleep-deprived hallucination, they thought, and laid back down to try and sleep. They opened their eyes one last time and saw the bear above them on the bed. The bear lunged and the narrator jumped out of bed screaming. The narrator grabbed the bear and threw it in the fireplace. They watched it burn and felt easy in doing so. Now the narrator was 19 and finally moving into their own place. As they were finishing unpacking everything, they noticed a rather large box, left on the front porch. Bringing it in, they saw that it was a cupboard, one that they didn't remember packing. The narrator left it in the living room. When they came back, there it was. The bear was sitting on the cupboard, staring at them. The story itself is fine, but that image is just not okay. This story is your standard haunted or possessed item story. I like it, but definitely could have used a few more scares. I guess the image was pretty scary all by itself. This picture is what cursed images are really made of. New Cell Phone is a short creepypasta, so I'll be reading it in full again. A couple months ago, my friend's cousin, a single mother, bought a new cell phone. After a long day of work, she came home, placed her phone on the counter, and went to watch TV. Her son came to her and asked if he could play with her new phone. She told him not to call anyone or mess with text messages, and he agreed. At around 11:20, she was drowsy, so she decided to tuck her son in and go to bed. She walked to his room and saw that he wasn't there. She ran over to the other room to find him sleeping on her bed with the phone in his hand. Relieved, she picked her phone back up from his hand to inspect it. Browsing through it, she noticed only minor changes such as a new background, banner, etc. But then she opened up her saved pictures. She began deleting the pictures he had taken until only one new picture remained. When she first saw it, she was in disbelief. It was her son sleeping on her bed, but the picture was taken by someone else above him, and it showed the left half of an elderly woman's face. This image in question is on screen now. Honestly, a very chilling story that seems like it could happen in real life. Crime Scene Photos is an interesting creepypasta that I hadn't heard of until starting research for this video. It's pretty short, but does what it set out to do with its short length. A man named Matt is waiting at a hotel for his friend Mike to show up. Finally, after waiting for what feels like forever, he decides to call him. What he gets instead is the police on the other end. The police tell Matt that his friend has been murdered, and they would like him to come to the crime scene for questioning. They give him the address, and he walked in that direction. Matt arrives and sees his friend in a bloody mess surrounded by a few cops. His friend was clearly visible on the ground. The cops asked him if he knew anything, but he could pick up that they were also accusing him in the nicest terms. After a back and forth talk, the cops asked if he could reach out to the victim's family. Matt did so, calling Jack, the victim's brother. The two talked for a minute and Jack didn't believe him, so he took these pictures and sent them to him. He finally believed him and told him he knew who the murderer was based on the leather jacket he wore, and that he would be there in 5 minutes. Matt didn't know the correlation between the jacket and who the murderer was. Then a thought suddenly came to him as Jack strolled up to the cops. He never told him where the murder took place. I don't have much to say about this one. It's pretty good. On to the next one. Red Moon was written by Avenging Angel and is our next creepypasta. This is the first and only, as far as I've seen, image creepypasta that is a sci-fi horror. You'll see what I mean, but let's get to the story. On July 18th of 2020, NASA launched a spacecraft named the Goliath. The Goliath had 6 crew members and was on a mission to establish the first colony on the moon. Radio communications with the crew were only possible on the side of the moon facing Earth, so the astronauts were told to keep on that side to have constant communication. The side of the moon they were going to colonize had few craters and seemed like a good match for their needs. Electronic journals were to be kept throughout the mission. The only danger came from the meteors, as the moon had no atmosphere to stop them. The journals came to NASA daily, and they were pretty mundane for the most part. Messages about where schools and hospitals could be placed, ideas for infrastructure with the moon's gravity, and how to properly establish society. Nothing interesting, that is, until no messages were received on the 17th of September. Of course, this could just be the astronauts forgetting to send one. The next day was the same thing, with no word from the crew. After a bit of time, the videos were finally recovered, and this is what was on them. The first video is from the 16th of September, and shows the astronauts exploring a crater near where they were planning to colonize. The video is 10 minutes in length and pretty normal. Near the end of the video, you can hear the crew talking about hearing scratching noises coming from the crater. These sounds were not audible in the video. The next video came from the 17th of September. It had the astronauts investigating a large crater near their site. This one was massive compared to the one from the other video. Everything seemed normal until the scratching sound begins. This time it is very audible in the video. The crew is visibly annoyed by it, so much so that one member walks towards the source and leans over the edge of the crater. An unknown source grabs the astronaut and pulls him into the crater, with the video stopping abruptly after. The final video has a different title. It is titled Code 7700 Please Help. In it, you can see one of the astronauts in an oxygen tent talking directly into the camera. His voice is low but urgent. He explains that he can't contact the radio for some reason, and that 2 of his crew have been slaughtered. The scratching noise starts again and the camera is knocked to the side. Pleas for help are heard as the scratching sounds begin to get louder. Blood and guts splatter on the side of the tent. The video ends abruptly. A 4-man team was sent to fix the communication tower. When the 4 returned, none of them wanted to talk about what they saw. They recovered a few things from the mission, including this photograph. This is such an excellent use of the image creepypasta format. The story itself is really creepy, especially if you have a fear of aliens. It also has this creepy final image to cap off the story. It reminds me of the movie Alien in a few ways, which is great. I will say that there's also some looming dread with this photo. It's so hard to discern exactly what you're looking at. That really adds to the nightmare fuel here. The painting is our next creepypasta. This creepypasta is written by Meek and can be found on creepypasta.com. There are actually 2 stories with this name, or at least that I could find. The name is pretty simple, so it's likely there are countless stories that bear the same name. The narrator starts the story by telling us about his brother that had gone missing, or more accurately, how his brother had been kidnapped. The kidnapper was described as being methodical and professional, as no fingerprints or signs of break-in were found that night. The narrator, though, knows the truth. It all started when his dad found a painting in the attic of their home. The painting was of a tall gray house surrounded by grass. Behind the house was a sudden drop down to the ocean. It was built on a cliff's edge. There were words written on the back of the painting that the narrator's mom recognized as Welsh, but didn't translate. The narrator didn't like the painting, but his dad loved it. The painting was then placed in the boys' room. The narrator wakes up one night at 2 a.m., feeling hot and sweaty. he sees that his brother Jamie is still asleep. He tiptoes out of the bedroom and gets some water from the sink. Feeling refreshed, he returns to bed. That's when he notices a strange black shape on the painting. The black shape resembles a man, but he didn't remember seeing him before. The next day it was gone. No one had believed him, and he didn't really believe himself. That night, though, he saw the man again. This time he was double the size and in a different position. The narrator covered his head with his blanket and went to sleep shaking. The next night the author woke again at 2 a.m. and saw that the painting was completely black. He tried to not make a move and be as still as possible. Fear overcame him though, and he got out of bed and crept towards the bedroom door. He opened it and then ran towards the bathroom. The narrator locked the door and hid in the tub. For a few moments, there was no sound, until the creaks of the floorboards could be heard. He stayed quiet for a moment as he heard someone walk up to the bathroom door. He called out asking if it was his brother, his mom, or his dad. Only sound that he heard in return was the scratching on the wood. This lasted for a few moments before he could hear whatever it was walking away. He awoke the next morning to the sound of banging on the door. It was his dad, and he was calling for the two boys. When only one emerged, they called the police. On the door of the bathroom were deep gash marks. To this day, his brother has never been found, and the narrator is sure he was taken by the entity from the painting. The painting itself looked different now. There was a small child that was sitting inside the house, and he appeared to be crying. The boy looked suspiciously like his brother, but no one would believe him. The narrator, now an adult, still has the painting. He keeps it in the attic, and every once in a while he'll hear footsteps from up there. He calls out his brother's name every time. Not once has there been a response. The image attached to this creepypasta is The Crying Boy by Bruno Amadio. This image is correlated with this creepypasta, but the picture itself has its own story to tell, likely one that I'll get to at a later part of this iceberg. The painting is a great short story to tell around a campfire. It has that easy retellability that a lot of these earlier creepypastas had. The story was circulating the internet in 2014. It's a very fun story and definitely one I bring out around Halloween for my non-creepypasta friends. SCP-3199 is our first SCP on one of these icebergs. It's a topic I've been wanting to cover for a long time. SCPs are more likely to be connected to a different iceberg that I have in the works, but there are some that are image-based or have famous images attached to them. SCP-3199 is one of those SCPs. It has an image that I'm sure you've seen before. This image is of the SCP in question. I'm going to read the description of SCP-3199. SCP-3199 denotes a species of sapient Category 5 biological entities of currently indeterminable origin. Though tissue samples indicate the presence of silky chicken, chimpanzee, stoat, mussel, adder, and human DNA. They are typically hairless, stained with a thin layer of albumin-like excretion, and stand at an average of 2.9 meters. Its weight averages 780 kilograms for a matured instance and 360 kilograms for a hatchling. Autopsy has determined that the cervical vertebrae of a mature SCP-3199 instance are composed of cartilage rather than bone. This enables the neck and throat to twist and dislocate to around 340 degrees in either direction, aiding their unusual reproductive cycle. SCP-3199 are opportunistic hunters engaging with live subjects within a currently unidentified radius within a radius of 0.6 kilometers surrounding hatchlings that have not yet reached full adolescence. Average speed is recorded at 25 kilometers an hour. Upon contact with humans or other animal subjects, SCP-3199 will proceed to redacted, liquefying internal organs and bone structure. A suitable cadaver is then transferred within a range of the closest hatchling. Regardless of what SCP-3199 appears to be, this image is pretty haunting on its own. A very clear sense of dread can be derived from it. It's something I wouldn't want to see at any point in time during the day, but especially not at night. Image001 is actually more of a video creepypasta than an image creepypasta, but it does have both. Either way, it is an interesting read, and like I mentioned before, some of these creepypastas will have overlap in other genres. A college student was about to start their first year at school and needed supplies. What they ended up doing was trying to find some local who was selling a laptop, as it was the last item they needed. They almost gave up before seeing an ad for one in the newspaper. The college student drove up to a house on the edge of the woods and bought the nice Dell laptop. The man selling it was thin and wore a worn flannel jacket, but that wasn't the interesting part about him. He seemed relieved that he was able to sell his laptop, which the narrator thought was strange. A short drive later, and the narrator was back in their apartment with the laptop. They booted it up and found that the laptop actually hadn't been wiped clean like advertised. Before they can reset the laptop, they see a series of video and image files with very basic names. They click on the first video file titled 001. It starts up and shows shaky cam footage from inside of a car. A woman leaves a bar and the car slowly starts to follow behind her. This leads directly into the next video, which was titled 002. This video continues with the car following behind the woman from the first video. The next video shows the car in the parking lot of the woman's house, as we see her walk in first. There's a pause in the video before the lights of the house go off. Another person then opens the door and is seen walking towards the house. They are wearing a black hoodie and they make their way inside the house quietly. This continues until video 4, which shows the person placing something in the bed of their truck and driving off. For a split second you can see them driving up to a house, but the interesting part is the truck that's parked outside of this house looks the same as the one the seller had. Video 5 starts inside of the house, and is almost too dark to see anything. Finally, the sounds of muffled screams could be heard as the camera panned up to show the lady from before, beaten and bloody. The camera slowly zoomed in on her face before cutting out. Video 6 showed a new woman, with rubber gloves and a respirator, pouring something into a bathtub. She pulled a black garbage bag in behind her and slowly started to deposit the items into the tub. It was clearly the woman from before. The laptop was turned over to the police and the narrator was able to find out a little about what they saw. The woman that was killed was the young girlfriend of a married man. The man's wife was the one dumping the girl's body. This doesn't explain how the man that the narrator bought the laptop from got it, or why they had the same truck. Questions they hoped the police could solve. Image001 is an interesting creepypasta for one specific reason. It feels like it could actually happen. The biggest factor is the lack of anything supernatural, but also the recording itself. Of course, I'm not sure who would record their entire crime like this. Maybe she was going to show it to her husband as some sort of act of intimidation or something. The creepypasta is fine, but that believability makes it a little more scary. I also like the ending being a little vague. Danny Boy is our next creepypasta. It was posted on the Creepypasta Wiki in 2015, but I can't find an author. The person who posted it goes by the name of Jake Wick. The story isn't terribly long, but it's interesting in how it is presented. It's presented like a real missing persons case. Let's read it. For those of you who don't know, the era of the 1980s wasn't the best time for a kid to grow up in America. Back then, there was a so-called satanic panic going on. Kids were going missing left and right, and everyone was convinced that the cults were to blame. This blame it on Satanist attitude was especially apparent where I grew up, in South Carolina. Around there, blaming non-Christians for problems was as much a part of the culture as guns, sweet tea, and going to church on Sundays. I grew up in a small town in the Sunshine State, but the state soon proved to grow cloudier and cloudier around me as time went on. Things began to go downhill for me when I was 12 years old. I grew up in a little one-story house with my parents and my 8-year-old brother Danny. It's safe to say that Danny could be pretty annoying sometimes. In fact, looking back, I'd say that he was on my nerves more than he was off. Still, I loved the kid, deep down. Once in a while, he and I got along, and the moments that we did see eye to eye, well, they were truly memorable. Our times together ceased on April 13th of 1984. That day seems like a dream to me, now a distant memory. Danny and I had just gotten home from school. Our father was still at work, and my mother was gone too. Leaving a note on the fridge for us, went to Jen's, please run to the supermarket and pick up eggs so I can make you cake. The following day was my birthday. I had almost forgotten. Well, I told Danny to stay put while I ran to the store, but the little bugger informed me that he was coming along. Of course, I argued with him. I did not need him coming with me to the store. He'd been annoying me the entire walk home from school. As I argued with him, I knew in the back of my mind that I had to take him. I mean, come on, the kid was 8 years old. I couldn't leave him home alone. My parents would kill me for that. I finally gave in, told him to shut his mouth and keep it shut, and set out the door with him. Of course, the little annoyance bugged me the entire way. By the time we got to the supermarket, I was about ready to clobber him. All I did, however, was pull him to the side and scold him for about a minute. Looking back on it now, I wish I hadn't. I wish I just embraced his annoyingness. Well, I turned away from the brat and made a beeline through the store, towards the poultry aisle. Always having trouble finding things in the supermarket, I was overjoyed that I was able to find the eggs. I found the aisle, opened the cold fridge door, and grabbed the eggs. All that was left to do was check out and find Danny. I couldn't believe it. I had even kept track of my little brother after I had scolded him. I frantically searched the store, and after not being able to find him for several minutes, I began to ask customers if they had seen a short, blonde-headed boy. No one had a clue. I even resorted to getting customer service to call for him. But my little brother didn't come. The worst part was going home and telling my parents. I felt terrible. The next day was the worst birthday ever, as you can imagine. I still hate my birthday for this reason. For weeks, the police searched for him. My parents frantically combed the entire town, always stopping to post missing person signs all over the place. I couldn't even think of what could have happened. I was scolded by my parents every night for it, but I quickly slipped into depression, taking to alcohol as a means of escape. After a month, the search was called off. No one had any idea where Danny was. He had disappeared without any trace. A couple weeks after the search was called off, the police called in my parents, showing them a photograph they had found in the parking lot of an abandoned store. The case remains open to this day. This story is told in a way that makes me think of a missing persons documentary. It goes beat for beat up to the moment the kid was taken. It even has a moment where they find a piece of evidence that keeps the story going. I'm not a fan of them just finding a creepy photograph, but I get it. This image isn't all that scary, but it does relate to the story, so it's not that bad, I suppose.